everyone, and welcome to today's Beyond Zero Tidbit. I am Catherine, also known as Punch Life Back, and this is the Matrix Guard. And it is Valentine's Day! Mwah! Happy Valentine's Day. So in honor of this holiday, I wanted to do today's tidbit all about loneliness, right? Because sometimes, for a lot of us, Valentine's Day can bring this up or be quite challenging in our lives. So I thought it was a good time to do it. So without further ado, here we go. So loneliness. This is something almost all of us experience from time to time. Short bouts of loneliness actually can negatively affect our immune system, and long-term bouts of loneliness can increase our overall risk of mortality. Yeah, loneliness kills. It's crazy. And so to make all this doom and gloom even worse, it is Valentine's Day. And while evolution has made us into social creatures, has given us this innate need to feel connected, many of us, especially on this particular day, can often feel alone, even while we're in relationships or within crowds of people. So I'm going to do a little link that you can do below in the description that takes you to a quiz to see how lonely you are. It is not a diagnostic tool quiz, it's more just for your information. So the APA Dictionary of Psychology defines loneliness as, and I quote, affective and cognitive discomfort or uneasiness from being or perceiving oneself to be alone or otherwise solitary. All right, so in other words, loneliness is the unpleasant feelings that arise when we perceive a lack of close or meaningful relationships in our lives. So like I said, loneliness is dangerous. It can be. A 2007 study by John Cacioppo and a neuroscientist, Steve Cole, discovered that the genes within our white blood cells express themselves differently in, and I'm quoting, socially isolated and relatively well-connected people. What? Okay, so that means that the loneliest of us, the genes that activate inflammatory responses were upregulated, while those governing antiviral responses were downregulated. Thus, when we are socially isolated, we probably have increased susceptibility to inflammation and viruses. And this might explain why loneliness can be a risk factor for our leading causes of death and many other chronic diseases. So, Psychology Today has an article that I really liked. It's called The 10 Surprising Facts About Loneliness. And I'm going to list them briefly here. I'm going to provide a link. I suggest you read it in detail because they're fascinating. So the first one is loneliness does not depend on how many friends or relationships you have, right? You can be lonely in a crowd. You can be lonely on your own. You can be lonely in your marriage. In fact, number 2, more than 60% of lonely people are married. Number 3, loneliness distorts our perceptions of our relationships. 4, loneliness is contagious in social networks. So I want to add something here because this one is so fascinating to me. It appears that lonely people are less able to pick up on social cues of connection, like smiling, someone giving them attention, or communicating commitment to them through body signals. So they're more likely to withdraw prematurely in a relationship. And this becomes contagious as their withdrawal is communicated to the other person who is wanting to connect with them, right? Like waiting and wanting to connect. So this negative self-fulfilling prophecy of withdrawal and loneliness ensues. There's a quote here by Dr. Nicholas Christakis that I wanted to share, and he says, if you're lonely, you transmit loneliness and then cut the tie, or the other person cuts the tie. But now that person has been affected, and they proceed to behave the same way. There is a cascade of loneliness that causes a disintegration of the social network. I had no idea. Loneliness is contagious. Number 5, loneliness makes us feel colder. 6, loneliness makes our bodies feel like they are under attack. 7, chronic illness significantly increases our risk for cardiovascular disease. 8, loneliness suppresses the functioning of our immune system, which we've talked about. 9, in fact, so this is where short-term loneliness can also influence our immune system. They found that college freshmen who felt lonely had poorer reactions to flu shots. So short-term loneliness, poorer reaction to the flu shot. And number 10, loneliness is as dangerous to us as cigarette smoking. Yeah. So there was a general social survey that says that the number of Americans who say they have 0 close friends has tripled since 1985. And the average number of people with which Americans feel like they can talk about important matters has dropped from 3 to 2. And millennials seem to have the highest rates of loneliness. No one really knows why yet, but Caroline Beaton has an explanation that I found particularly insightful. So she thinks that loneliness is more prevalent with millennials because millennials spend so much of their time online. And while the internet can be self-soothing, it can be a coping device, it appears to have its downsides too. So a couple of the downsides is that contagion of loneliness we were talking can go viral, right? The influence in your social network can be so much more exponential when you're online. 2 is that millennials sometimes spend so much of their time online that they don't have enough time left over to connect with people in person, which is just essential to our well-being. And also, connections online aren't necessarily meaningful enough. They're not necessarily as close enough, or as close as friendships can be, relationships can be when we're in person with people. There's also, guys, this tendency to always be looking at our screens or have them accessible when we're with somebody. And of course, that drives further disconnection. But millennials aren't alone. Adolescents and the elderly also have higher rates of loneliness. For example, more than 20% of people over 60 frequently feel isolated. So here's the last little factoid, and then we're going to get into the work. Loneliness can lead to hostility, which can further push people away. So this happens because, how do I say this? So loneliness can create a mental state of hypervigilance where we start to anticipate rejection from others. And when we expect other people to hurt us, that makes us hostile. Secondarily, hostility lets us blame others for our painful feelings of loneliness, which can temporarily make us feel better and let ourselves off the hook, right? Because we can really only overcome our loneliness when we take responsibility for it. So here's a quote by Winch PhD. He says, "Loneliness evokes emotional pain and vulnerability, as well as a fundamental feeling of disappointment in the people around us that have allowed us to become lonely. That can lead us to feel more hostile towards others and make them hesitate to engage with us at the very time we're desperate to deepen our emotional and social connections with them. And so, as hard as it is, and it is, give others the benefit of the doubt and try to make the time you spend with them genuine and satisfying." All right, so how do we reduce loneliness? It isn't about the number of relationships we have, but the quality of the relationships we have. Are they meaningful? Do we feel accepted? Do we feel heard and understood? Is the relationship reciprocal? Are we listening? Are we hearing? Are we seeking to understand our friends, our loved ones? So it is up to each of us to take responsibility for our loneliness. No one really can solve this for us. And it is common that when we want closeness most, we push people away. So we must somehow resist that urge and find the willingness to reach out anyways. Loneliness is really an opportunity to connect, should we choose to accept it. So a special note on authenticity here. It really matters. If loneliness is a perceived lack of connection, and if connection is two people accepting each other for who they are, then connection relies on authenticity. You can only be accepted for who you really are when you show someone who you really are, right? So to the best of your ability, let other people see you. It isn't always easy to take off your masks and let your guard down, but I know you can do it. Okay, so this is what taking responsibility for your loneliness can look like. Step 1, you want to notice your feelings of loneliness. It's especially helpful if you can be as non-judgmental about your emotional pain. Step 2 is to be aware of your feelings as transitory, like all emotions are. So remember, emotions are not facts, they're not proof, they're states of being that shift and change. Step 3 is to unpack the thinking that is causing the loneliness and challenging its validity. So what is the story you're telling yourself that is triggering your feelings of loneliness? And how valid is that story? Perhaps it's a story of shame where you're telling yourself, I'm not lovable because of X, or no one will ever like me because of Y. Step 4 is really about blaming. So if you are blaming others for your loneliness, or you're otherwise feeling hostile, unpack your thinking, right? And challenge its validity too, just like you did with your thinking around why you were feeling lonely. And then step 5 is, of course, take steps to connect with others and share your authentic self as much as possible. So Tony Bernard has, I'm gonna do all these links, so don't worry, has a list of 10 things to try when you're feeling lonely that it might be helpful, and I wanted to share them in case what I just presented isn't something that you want to do today. So 1, don't blame yourself in any way, shape, or form. 2, seek relief from a non-human friend like a pet. Number 3, connect with a friend if you can. Number 4, do something creative, no matter how simple. Number 5, help someone in need. Number 6, call to mind others who are feeling lonely and send them kind and compassionate thoughts. Number 7, visualize someplace you'd like to be and see if just for a moment you can feel happy for those who are there. Number 8, treat loneliness as an old friend who's dropped in for a visit despite not having received an invitation. And number 9, remind yourself that life is not always fun and that tomorrow is a new day. All right, so I have an exercise for reaching out that I want to present to you as an opportunity for today. I think it is the most beautiful thing to do on Valentine's Day. This particular version of this exercise comes from Greater Good in Action. If you access the worksheet, you have access to all of these links. So this exercise has been shown to boost happiness, even up to 6 weeks later, perhaps even longer, which is just ridiculously mind-blowing to me. So here's the gist of it. We're gonna write a gratitude letter. So you wanna recall someone who did something for you that you are deeply grateful for, but to whom you have never expressed your sincere gratitude. Ideally, this is someone that you can actually meet with in person sometime in the next week. So you're gonna write the letter following these points. Write as though you are addressing them directly. So, dear so-and-so. Don't worry about being perfect with your spelling or grammar. It is not about that. Describe what they did, why you are grateful, and how their behavior has affected your life. You want to be as specific as possible. And then you want to describe what you are doing in your life now and how often you remember his or her efforts. And then finally, you want to try to keep it to about 1 page or 300 words. So not very long, right? So here's the thing. That in and of itself will make you feel better and make you feel more connected. To really get the maximum benefit, you want to try and meet this person in person to deliver the letter. All right? You can be virtually done, but if you can do it in person, that's where you're gonna get the most bang for your time. And this is how you do that meeting. So you plan a visit with a person and you let them know that you would like to see them and tell them that you have something special to share, but do not reveal the exact purpose. When you meet, let them know you are grateful, right? Grateful to them and want to read them a letter expressing your gratitude. You want to ask them to refrain from speaking until you are done. So you're going to read it to them. And then you want to take time reading the letter. And you want to pay attention to how you feel and to their responses, like their visual responses. Afterward, be receptive to their verbal responses and discuss your feelings together. And then you want to give them the letter before you leave. I know the first time I heard this exercise, I was like, oh, no way am I meeting with someone and then awkwardly deciding to read them a letter. But what has helped me is I was like, oh, but what if I was them? What if I was receiving the letter? And that feels really good to me. So here's the final thought, you guys. None of us are ever truly alone because we have ourselves. So whenever you aren't getting the connection you want from others, there is an opportunity to give yourself the connection you are wanting. Paying attention to how you feel. Practicing self-compassion, understanding, non-judgment, and acceptance of your emotional reality can make you feel seen, make you feel heard, make you feel worthy of love. So likewise, taking the time to challenge your thoughts right? To actually like challenge their validity can be exactly what you need. So here's a challenge. Repeat the above gratitude letter, but this time write it to yourself. That's it, guys. Thank you so much. Until next time, stay true and never settle. Mwah! And happy Valentine's Day. Bye!